Okay, welcome, welcome. I'm just gonna hop into this. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Africa No Filter's Masterclass. Africa No Filter hosts masterclasses to empower storytellers with skills and resources aimed at boosting the business of their creativity. In this discussion, you can use the chat box to introduce yourself, where you're from, what type of work you do, if you'd like to share. And it's also an opportunity for you to see who is also in the room, and you can connect in that way. Allow me to introduce myself as your host for today. My name is Oluwaseun Babalola. I'm a documentary and narrative writer and director and television producer. I've made 4 feature documentary films. I've written and produced on a number of documentary television programs for networks such as CNN, HBO, Starz, Netflix, to which I've earned 2 Emmy nominations. I've also created, directed, and produced 3 seasons of a documentary digital series focused on African youth culture that you can find online. And I'm executive director and founder of CoCinema Inc. So what CoCinema Inc. is a nonprofit founded to provide funding and career support for Africa and African diaspora media professionals. So that includes 2 short film grant funds. So before we begin, there will be 2 polls we run during the masterclass. The first is aimed at understanding your experience and your skill level. And the second will be to find out what you're hoping to gain from this masterclass. So without further ado, we're going to get on with the show. So today we will be focused on documentary funding. So documentary funding can sometimes be tricky for both experienced and new filmmakers. It can be hard to explain a story that you may not know how to end. It can also be intimidating when you see applications and you don't exactly know what funders are looking for and they're asking for all these materials. So we're hoping that this masterclass can help with that, as well as answer any questions that you might have. And to fill us in on a specific fund, the Sundance Documentary Fund, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Dominic Davis. So Dominic Davis returned to the Sundance Institute in 2022 as manager of the Documentary Fund. In 2011, Dominic worked in the Artist Relations Office of the Sundance Film Festival. He went on to program for the American Museum of Natural History, Tribeca Film Festival, and Rooftop Films. He has reviewed applications for a Catapult Film Fund and Creative Capital, and managed the Rooftop Films Filmmakers Fund. He has a degree in mass media studies, and when not watching movies, he goes for very long runs. Hi, Dominic. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's great to be here. It's wonderful to be here and to be part of this conversation.
Yeah,
I created a slideshow, but I actually think I'm just going to talk today, if that's all right with everyone.
that's
I
awesome.
find it difficult to move the slides and have the conversation.
Yes,
Um,
speak from the heart.
yeah, I mean, as you said, I'll be sharing information today about documentary film funding, including work a little bit about the Sundance Institute and the documentary film program, which we refer to as the DFP, and particular focus on funding opportunities and grants within the United States. Um, so over the last couple years, the focus of the DFP and the Sundance Institute has been to ensure that we are meeting the evolving needs of the global independent artist community. We've made it our top priority and guiding principle to deploy our resources to the artist communities that need them most and to contribute to a more equitable and sustainable field. We work to safeguard and protect the freedom of artistic expression through solving the most critical challenges facing the independence of storytelling. So with that in mind, we at the DFP are interested in cultivating relationships with and hearing directly from nonfiction artists working in Africa. That's why we attend these events. We want to get to know you. We want to get to know the stories you're telling. And we want to learn about the unique challenges that you might be facing. So the Sundance Documentary Film Program, the DFP, is one of the oldest artist programs that the Institute offers. It was established over 20 years ago by the late Diane Wireman, who is a visionary leader in our field, and with support of the Open Society Foundations, our founding and most longstanding partner. And I'm just going to drop our website into the chat right now so you can find out more about the program. Let's see if I can do that actually. I'm not sure that worked, but I'm happy to figure that out later. So the Sundance Documentary Fund has supported works that express the world in creative, complex, and beautiful and provocative ways, in films that have created real cultural and social impact around some of the most pressing issues of our time. When we grant, we give grants that are non-recoupable, meaning the money is not required to be returned. If you sell your film to a distributor, the money is yours to spend on a project. We grant to individuals. We don't need fiscal sponsors or co-production entities, and we don't require any funding to be in place. Finally, I think it's important to say one more thing that we don't do, and that's we don't take any rights. We just ask to be recognized in the end credits of the film and on promotion material where relevant. So the fund continues to uplift. Our priorities are to uplift productions led by artists from communities that have been traditionally marginalized. That's artists who self-identify as filmmakers of color, Indigenous filmmakers, LGBTQ+, and filmmakers with disabilities. We remain committed to elevating voices beyond our borders and celebrating the rich diversity of filmmaking traditions around the world. When we work internationally, we're not looking to impose a certain type of storytelling or a certain North American perspective or narrative tradition on the stories. We really want to elevate stories that are natural to the communities and the stories that are being shared on screen. So we really, are looking to work with partners and filmmakers who are working in, traditions that are true to the story, true to the people on screen, true to themselves as artists. Our current international priorities are artists living and working in regions that lack a robust infrastructure or support for independent film, filmmakers working in regions of conflict, and countries where freedom of expression is under threat. So that's a little bit about the fund and how we work, but I really wanted to focus today on what reviewers and funders are looking for. I can't promise that after this class, your film is definitely going to get funded, but I hope you'll understand a little bit more the questions that I'm thinking as a reviewer and that reviewers in the United States are considering when looking at a project. And these questions can guide how we look at the answers that you're giving to us in an application. And there's really 4 buckets in no particular order. We're looking for a strong artistic vision, compelling storytelling, the feasibility of the project, and then we're looking at the creative team and their connection to the story. So I'm going to go through these 4 criteria by telling you the questions that kind of go through my head as I'm reading the application. When we start with a strong artistic vision, we're asking, what is the structure of the film and how effective is it in exploring the film's ideas? What creative approaches and techniques is the team using? Does the form complement and enrich the story and themes? And what's interesting or novel about the visual approach and process? Then we're thinking about cohesion. Is the approach strong and cohesive? Do the visual materials that you provide as part of your application relate to the written proposal? If they don't, is there an understanding of how you're going to get them to? And we're thinking about characters. Are they compelling and engaging? Do you have demonstrated intimacy and connection to them? Are we getting to see them on screen open up and reveal more about the story? And what layers of nuance do you as filmmakers bring to the topic and themes? Is there a strong point of view from the filmmaker? And is that point of view being utilized in a productive way? And then is that evident in the sample? So when we talk about compelling storytelling, here we start with just a really big question, which is why is film the best medium to tell this story? Why is it a film rather than an article or a panel discussion? And then what is unique about this story? And what is unique about your point of view in telling the story? How is the structure of the film going to be effective in exploring the film's ideas? And does the proposal that you put forward articulate a narrative structure that has the weight to carry the film? We're also thinking about, why are you, as a filmmaker, director, producer, making this film? And why you're making it in this way? And then finally, we're thinking about relevance. So why now? We're hoping to see a clear reason why this film needs to exist in the contemporary world at this time. When thinking about feasibility, we're really looking at the answers provided in our applications. And, I'll take a second now to say that most North American funders are using the Documentary Core app. So we're using roughly the same set of questions across all funders. And we do that because we hope it takes some of the onerousness of filling out an application off of filmmakers. So you fill out the application once and you use the same answers to fill out all applications. But in that, we're looking to see, is the application as written, is it possible to achieve what you've written in the parameters you set as a film team? Are the expectations of the filmmakers reasonable and accounted for in the really logistical questions like timeline and budget? And I think it's worth talking about the budget here. Budgets really shine a light on the priorities of a film team. We want to see if everything in an application is accounted for and in the budget. We look to see if the funding strategy is realistic for the creative and storytelling goals of the proposals. So this is just one place where we see questions start to bubble up in reviewing an application. And I'll say, as a reviewer, I'm asking a lot of questions, but hopefully I'm not left with too many questions unanswered by the time I get to completing the application that you've filled out. So an example of a type of question that comes up in the budget would be if you say that the film will come together in the edit, but then you don't have a robust line in the budget for the editing or an experienced editor on board. So then we start to have questions about feasibility. So it's important, I think, it's important to think of the application as a choir. Every section needs to be singing the same song and singing in unison. And then I don't have those feasibility questions that pop up when I reviewed an application. And then I think the other important thing to say about a budget is make sure you're budgeting your above the line team members with a living wage. We want to see it. We understand so many people defer payment, provide in-kind and sweat equity support, in the budget, and not maybe the last ones to be paid. But we want to understand if and hopefully when you get paid, what is that going to be? Don't send a budget with that number 0, put the actual numbers in there. It's really not uncommon for doc budgets in the United States to be around $700,000 US up to $1 million US. So don't be afraid to just put the actual numbers for your, especially above the line team, your directors and producers into that budget. And so speaking of the creative team and your connection to the story, we want to see how you're engaging with the community and how their concerns or their story or their input is being taken into the production of the film. We're really forefronting discussions around community care and sometimes risk assessment if necessary by questioning whether the key creative team is fulfilling a duty of care towards the protagonists, the characters, the subjects, the people in your film. And then if you are dealing with sensitive issues, understanding, if you've completed a risk assessment and are taking care with the footage and the information that you're collecting as filmmakers. We want to know why the key creative team is well positioned to tell this story. We want to know if you as filmmakers have unique access, a unique angle, or lens on the story. Do you have a unique and clear connection to the people who are going to be in the film? We also think of the application as a place where you can be really honest with us. So if you're dealing with ethical concerns, you're grappling with them as you tell the story, we understand you might not have that fully figured out yet, but we want to see how you're dealing with them, how you're planning to address them, what kind of concerns you see as potentially showing up in the film, and then in what ways you're going to deal with them. And then really thinking about your career as filmmakers. One thing that is present in all cohorts of funding that we do are first-time filmmakers, but we also have experienced mid-career filmmakers in every cohort of filmmakers that we support. So if you're not a first-time filmmaker, if you're mid-career or experienced and you're taking a big step in your career or you're challenging yourself artistically, make sure you say that in the application. Let us know why now, why supporting you now is important, how you're challenging yourself, and if this represents a departure, why you're making that change. We're also looking to see if the team has the collective skill set to do justice to the subject matter and the people in the film, if you have the experience and resources to deliver on that in your project proposal. So, we do collect bios and artist statements from the key creative individuals, but don't be afraid to put information about your advisors, your mentors, your kind of network of people that help you problem solve and telling the stories visually. And finally, I think it's worth noting that film teams' access to resources, both creative and financial, are taken into consideration to ensure funds are prioritized for those who need them most. So there's a particular moment in our review where we kind of take a step back and look more broadly at how our funds will have the greatest impact on which projects we support. And then last note I'll make on the written proposal is, we're generally not looking for great grant writers. We want great filmmakers. So we're not evaluating eloquence. Simplicity is great. Detail, clarity, and specificity are what's really appreciated. We want to support you in the creation of a great film and understand that this grant writing process is complex, can be daunting. We really just want to understand how you're dealing with these questions, and we're not looking for right answers, and we're not looking for beautiful prose. So I want to talk now about visual samples. And I think the biggest mistake that I see in reviewing applications are when the written answers to questions and the visual samples are not in sync. So if you tell me about this beautiful artistic approach and this incredible story you have access to, and then you submit a work sample that's just really rough verite footage and includes none of that artistic approach, and I don't really see the story coming through, that's a big concern for reviewers because we're not seeing everything just written coming through in the visual sample, and we're not clear how you're going to get there. So I really think it's important to position the work sample and say, this is what the work sample does contain, but it's missing these elements that I've written about. So here again, we are asking some of those questions. Are the artistic elements written about present in the visual materials? Is that point of view evident in the sample? And are the artistic elements mentioned in the proposal present in that visual material? And we tend to think about development and production and post-production applications a little differently. So when you're thinking about development, we're not always requiring visual samples, but projects that have not yet secured characters or subjects or cannot articulate a story or structure or cannot explain the project's driving central question are rarely supported by our fund. Though visual samples may not be required, they're generally encouraged, and that can be character sketches, a sense of place, a teaser, just where and who you'll spend time with. Anything can be useful here. And then when we're looking at development applications, we're going to depend a little bit more on the written application than the visual samples, just because we understand they may not be fully developed. So it is a little challenging for applications with no visuals to compete with those with visual samples. So we typically compare development applications against other development applications. We're not looking at a development application compared against a post-production application that has a rough cut. It's just not fair. So if you don't have visual samples, though, you still are going to be competing with applications that do. In that case, the proposal should show a strong defined vision for the project and should be able to identify that central driving question, which should be rich and novel. And it's always great to see for a project that doesn't have a current work sample, a previous work sample. So what are some past works that the key creative team has completed, preferably director or producer, that speak to the current project? And I think that's really important. Sometimes, folks might, in a feature documentary application, submit a previous work sample that's a short fiction film. And I think it's important, again, to position that, say why you submitted that and what it tells us about the current project. Because sometimes it's not always clear with just the Vimeo link, what it tells us about the current project. And then, if you have any visual samples related to the current project, like a lookbook or a mood board, explain how that work is relevant and helpful. Any context. Tell us if you submit visual materials like a teaser, what it's showing and what is missing. That context is just so important. And, partially about just letting us know, letting us know what the work sample is and is not, but also letting us know how you're going to get what you've written about into that work sample. And especially if things are absent from that work sample. And that's at all stages of production, but it's often a little bit more important in those development materials because that work is not fully teased out. For production and post-production application, where we're going to have a greater emphasis on visual samples, they should be developed enough that they're a good reflection of several elements of the film, plus overarching themes, motifs, and narrative beats, or relationships between scenes. We're always happy to accept rough cuts as appropriate, especially if they show a wide range of the storytelling of the artistic approach. Across the board, it's more helpful to submit full scenes. It's often harder to convey tone and pacing in a trailer or sizzle reel that hits all the narrative beats. And then, production applications with just a short teaser or minimal visuals really don't compete against that kind of, longer work sample that shows more complete scenes. So it's fine to, in a work sample for a production application, to submit a teaser and then like 2 or 3 scenes, just to really give us a broad range of what we're going to see on screen. So Sundance, as an organization, we call ourselves artists first. So we really listen to the needs of our grantees when we are thinking about what kinds of support we want to offer. It's largely dictated and dependent on what grantees communicate to us. So to illustrate that a little bit more, I want to talk about some recently supported films, why they were funded and how they define success. And I think that's useful because we really want filmmakers to define success for themselves. When we're thinking about impact of a film, if one person feels less alone in the world, that's impact. If the film streams on Netflix, that reaches broad audiences, but it's not a requirement. It's not what we're looking for. We're not saying every film needs to have a broad theatrical release and stream on a major network. We want you to define the audience. We want you as filmmakers to define success for the film. And I think that's one thing I really like about Sundance is we let filmmakers define success. We don't impose a specific metric upon them. Certainly there are certainly there are universal measurements like awards, festivals, and premieres. But we've also had films that have created policy change and touched hearts and minds on specific issues. So Okay, so the first film I want to talk about is a film called Nocturnes. And this film is set amidst the lush eastern Himalayan forest and looks at moths as they uh, convey a mysterious message is the log line, but really it's about the migration of moths up a mountain to cooler climates because of climate change and the scientists who observe them. So this film was funded in 2020 by the Sandbox Fund. And the Sandbox Fund is a separate from the documentary fund. We call it a special opportunity fund. And it's really looking at science storytelling, stories about science and scientists, particularly among those that we might not, usually consider when we're thinking about who does science and how they do it. And so this film was funded through that opportunity in 2020, and then it premiered at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival. It did win a special jury prize there, and it's gone on to screen, at festivals around the world. But it's really a gorgeous document of the work of researchers in capturing these moths in the Himalayas, and it's just a stunning meditative look at their work with a really complex and dynamic sound design. And this is a film that's just artistically ambitious and helps you and audiences wander at the natural world. So, that's a film that's out in the world right now. I'm sure if you've been following the festival circuit, you've probably seen a little more information about it. An example of a film from the last couple years would be Milisutundo. This is a film that we supported in 2019 through the Documentary Fund, and then it took part in the 2019 Producer Summit. And I can talk, if folks want, about the kind of broad range of support that the Documentary Film Program offers. But this is a film that I also premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and then had a really fantastic, I think, festival run throughout the last year. And I think in looking at applications, this is a film I see referenced a lot because it took, again, a really ambitious artistic approach to the story. And I think it's created shoulders for other filmmakers to stand on. So when, we see people reference this film, we get a good sense of the artistic approach of the film and how they see it fitting into a narrative tradition within South Africa. And then lastly, this year we supported a film called The Battle for Laikipia. And I think this is an exciting project for us to have supported. And we supported it in 2017. And then it just premiered at the 2024 Film Festival. But touches on just so many important issues of our time: climate change, colonialism, land disputes in a climate changing world. And for the Institute, with a particular focus on Indigenous storytellers globally, but also on stories of climate change and the environment, this, I think, really highlights tensions within those two spaces, those two areas that are really important to the Institute, but also just tells, an important story for our time, something that I think, particularly sitting in the United States, has been poorly covered by the media. And, other projects that we've recently supported include All That Breathes, which is part of the Oscars last year, American Factory, Collective, Crip Camp, Hale County This Morning, This Evening, No Other Land, Strong Island, Sugarcane, The Territory, Time, and Union. So just a small selection of the projects we've supported over the past few years that I think have had major impact in the world and in the documentary space. Before I wrap up, I think it's really important to mention that our grants here at Sundance and everywhere at work are highly competitive. This year, the Sundance Documentary Fund received almost 2,000 applications and will fund just about 30. So that's something like 1.5% of all projects that get submitted will receive a grant from us. While these opportunities are highly competitive, I want to stress again here that we want to see your projects. To reiterate, stories from the continent of Africa are a priority area for us, and we want to see more films funded from this region. So in order to achieve that goal, we absolutely welcome and encourage your applications to our programs. I think that is really what I wanted to say about the work and the funding. And I want to thank you all for your time and listening. And really want this to be an opportunity for you to ask me questions about the work and what we're looking for and how to get your films funded. And I'm sorry if I didn't drop the there we go, website into the chat, but there it is now. So you can find out more about our programs at that link.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I also love that you take care and consider the needs of not just like the crews working on the films and being paid, but also the protagonists telling the story. Because I think we get so focused on like, we got to do production, we got to get the film done. But there's actually other elements that need support and that are very important. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Before we get into the Q&A though, there's a poll that we have to do. It should pop up on your screens. Please make sure to fill out that poll before the conversation is over. Yep, here we go. It just popped up. So I'll give you a second to complete that, and then we will go over to the other portion. Or I guess actually, while people do that, I have a question. So you you touched on this quite a bit in terms of development, which I think is a tough spot for some people in terms of like the chicken or the egg. Like they're just like, well, I need the money to start, but I can't start because and all that stuff. So how do I apply? So if you're a first-time filmmaker and you have no money, you have no resources, but you have this great story, but you really need the money to start it. Let's say you have to travel somewhere or something. What advice would you give for someone who wants to apply for the fund?
Yeah, I think for our funds, we always support projects in development. We support projects at all stages of production. And so I think it's really important for us to understand in the development application how this moment can be catalytic. So you can talk about the creation of a fundraising trailer or teaser that you're going to capture using this, production or this development funding rather that you're going to get, and then use that to raise more money. That's, an exciting space, I think, for a lot of funders to consider support. And in fact, for Catapult, organization I've worked at in the past, that's kind of exactly what they do. They help move filmmakers into production and are really excited about these catalytic moments where there are few resources about supporting people in those times to help get them into next stages. So for us, I think it's really important to say how, especially if you're very early on the project, how our support will help this project move forward. And you have a question within the application that really outline, you can outline there and say, this funding will enable me to do whatever. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's finally get some of these folks on camera. But then, I think it's incredibly useful, especially for a first-time filmmaker, to help us understand where you're getting input, especially if you don't have any previous work samples. So do you have a producer on board? Who is that? What's their experience? Do you have mentors, professors, advisors, people who are going to help you move through space? If you're traveling to someplace far away, tell us about your plan to have a fixer, a local producer, an associate producer, someone on the ground who's going to help you, get there. I think we're not afraid to fund projects in development. We understand it can be a dynamic time in the production of a film, but we're really looking to see what is put in place to help the film be successful, and then how with this, small amount of support, and development is funded up to $50,000. So with that support, then how will the film move forward?
Perfect. Well, with that, I'm going to head over to the Q&A chat and ask some questions. Let's see. I'll start from the bottom. So the most recent one is, do you accept Faisal Malik, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, filmmaker from Kenya. Do you accept applications from productions that have one creative who is running the role of producer and director for a production?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem at all. I think we can take a step back here and talk about, the idea of a supported artist and a grantee for us. When we support a project, we're supporting both the film and the key creative individuals on that film. However, you all define that as filmmakers. Again, we don't really impose a way in which we want you to work. We're open to co-productions, we don't require them. We're open to directors and producers. We're open to people who work separately. We want to support people, and the Sundance Institute has a variety of programs that are focused on filmmakers individually, not just films. But we want to support people to have long, sustainable careers. So we don't, we don't necessarily think it's, in the best interest of every project to have, director, producer be the same person. But we want to support the people who are doing the work of producing and the work of editing to have careers as well. So we don't want to perpetuate the idea that everyone has to, wear multiple hats on a project and work in a lot of different ways. We understand it happens that way for a lot of reasons. But we, want to help people have sustainable careers, however they define that. And so, we really have focuses on directors, producers, and editors as those three stages of production. But we understand that, each film is different. And so we want you to define the key creatives on a project.
Great. Let's go to the next one. So this is a very straightforward one. Is post-production also included in this program?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I mentioned briefly in the list of projects that we supported a film called Sugarcane, which is just come out in theaters in the United States, and it's on Disney Plus and will be playing on Hulu. And that's a project that we supported in post-production.
Awesome.
And so, in those stages, we're really looking at supporting the post-production process, and production and post-production applications can receive up to $100,000 US. And so, we understand that just the needs of the project at those stages tend to be more expensive and more robust. So, that was a project that I think came in with a pretty decent rough cut of the film. And then, we helped support them through the editorial and the post-production work that needed to happen on the film.
Perfect. And Jennifer wants to know, are there specific criteria and considerations Sundance uses to assess the cultural and social impact of projects and how it aligns to the submissions that meet these priorities?
Yeah, impact is the answers filmmakers give to the question of impact, I think, can be really illuminating for a project. It's not always required. We certainly aren't expecting that every project in development has figured out exactly what the impact of the film is going to be. But here again, we want filmmakers to define success of impact. So we want to know from filmmakers what impact they want the film to have on the world. We're not imposing a specific view of impact on a project. We had this partner at the Kendeda Fund for a number of years, and they just had this beautiful sense of impact being changing one individual's heart or mind, or making one person feel less alone. That's impact. Changing policy on a global level is also impact. So there's a wide range of what impact can be, and we want to know from filmmakers what they expect that impact to be. And so for those questions around production, or sorry, distribution, audience, and impact, those are not as essential to a development application. We want to see those more fleshed out, especially for production and post-production applications. And we do sometimes do some impact funding. So, especially if you're going after some impact funding, those have to be really buttoned up, and there should be a pretty, well-written proposal about the impact of the film. But there's just so many different ways to define that in this moment, and recognizing I sit, in the United States, and we work, within a system that's defined by Hollywood and the Los Angeles entertainment industry and the New York entertainment industry. I'm in New York. But I think right now there's a lot of uncertainty in the American entertainment business. And so I think there's also a lot of opportunity for filmmakers to find and connect with new audiences, to find novel approaches to reaching those audiences. And so right now, I'm not going to impose any sort of structure on, how you're going to reach your audience and who that audience is, especially in this moment of just uncertainty about how to do that. That said, I think the least useful answer to the audience and distribution question is I want to premiere at an A-list festival and stream on Netflix. Everyone wants that, but tell me what specifically audiences within the premiere festival world, within Netflix, that you want to reach. Don't just, tell me that ideal goal that everyone wants, but tell me why your film is important to releasing that way, and what specifically, who you're going to reach within those spaces.
Awesome. And what about non-traditional films in terms of, let's say an attendee asked can an institute apply for funding for its documentary film, as opposed to an individual filmmaker?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I tried to keep this conversation pretty broad about funding, specifically from North American nonprofit organizations. And I'm happy to talk more specifically about the Sundance Institute and the documentary film program and how we fund. But, this is a case where it would really depend. Again, independence is an important concept for the Institute and for our work. And so if filmmakers are supported by an institute or a nonprofit or an NGO in helping to tell or release their film because it's a natural partner, I think that can be an exciting place. An example of a film that we've supported recently was released on Patagonia Films. Patagonia is like the outdoor clothing company. And so they helped send the film out to their entire email list. It was released online. It reached a lot of eyes. So that, is an example of a kind of natural partnership. But if an institute is hiring filmmakers to tell a story they want to tell, so if the idea originates within a nonprofit, an institute, an NGO, and then they hire filmmakers to tell the story, I struggle sometimes to see that as truly independent storytelling, especially if they're giving creative input on what the story is and how it's told.
Yeah. And so when it comes to, let's say your application becomes one of the 1% that gets the fund, what kind of support does Sundance, provide for the films going forward after that, is granted?
Yeah. So we tend to think of the grant, the money, as just one step into artistic support. All projects are supported throughout the life of the project, and we support the key creative individuals as supported artists within the life of that project. So, I mentioned the Battle for Laikipia was funded in 2017. We supported that film team and those artists through its release this year. So they were considered, grantees and active supported artists throughout that process. And the range of support is really dictated by filmmakers, but, includes crew recommendations, rough cut review and feedback, festival strategy, distribution strategy, and then, we also have a series of labs and fellowships. So that's kind of the other side of my department. I work specifically in the fund, and we have our labs and fellowships. And these support projects and artists by providing creative and strategic opportunities at critical moments in the creative process. Our labs focus on craft and creating community among key creative collaborators, that's directors, producers, and editors. And roughly, those are defined as stages of production. So directors in development, producers in production, editors in post. So two examples of that are our documentary edited intensive, which just completed last week here in New York up at Jacob Burns Film Center. And so intensive fellows advance their projects through a rigorous creative exploration and discussion of story structure and character development with world-class advisors. And then the documentary film producers track is a years-long program that offers specific project support and mentorship through the lab. So that's a cohort of producers, mentors, and advisors that work together over the course of a year, whereas the Edit Intensive is a week-long, real tight-knit, work deeply on a number of issues. And so I think that shows the breadth of the work we do. Projects are eligible to support or eligible for that support through the application comes through the fund, and then there's a series of other applications that are open to supported artists through the Institute. And those are just within the DFP. There's other programs through our Artist Advancement Program, through the Episodic Lab, through the Fiction Film Program at Sundance. So there really is a pretty broad range of support, both that's open to artists from anywhere in the world telling stories on any topic at any stage of production. And then there's other opportunities for people who have been supported to help build those sustainable careers.
And I know this is, you're specifically for the fund, but there is someone asking about documentary series and where that might fit in with Sundance. And you mentioned the Episodic Lab, so maybe we can talk about that.
So the episodic program is housed within a different part of the Institute, so I'm not super familiar with it, but I believe at this time they're not funding documentary series within the Institute. For series development, there are organizations like the Redford Center. So Robert Redford is the founder of the Institute. He's also founder of the Redford Center, which does fund documentary series. So we're happy to point people and resources that might be available to them. But at this time, I don't believe the Institute offers support for series in particular for docuseries.
Great, thank you for that. And just scrolling through here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Make sure you keep those questions coming if you have more, by the way. We have some time. And so, yeah, we spoke about, okay, so question about story structure. So I personally get asked a lot because I help people fill out applications and things, and they come across the question of how do I write it like we don't need to do treatment 101, but I feel like this is something that maybe could be spoken about because I know a lot of people don't know how to craft their story when it comes to documentary and kind of putting it together where other people can understand it. So maybe if you can give some pointers to that too, that might be helpful.
Yeah, so the application starts with your log line and your story summary. And it starts that way because in many ways, those are some of the most important questions. We want to understand the story you're telling. And then it's followed pretty quickly by our artistic approach because we want to understand how you're telling that story. So we're not, depending on the stage of production, these should be more buttoned up or clear as you go along. We're open to having some questions in the story, especially for the project and development that is evolving quickly. And so what we want to understand is how you see the arc of the story, if it's something that you can tell, or what are the potential outcomes, and how you're going to follow it. Where people come into trouble, I think, in the story summary is running into issues that could make for a bad film. And so an example might be "and then." Like if you watch a film and the edit feels like "and then, and then, and then, and then," and it doesn't feel like there's a natural flow to it, that you can run into issues with that when you're writing that story summary too. So we want to, understand the kind of natural flow of the story in there, not just like bullet points, or kind of rapid fire points. And again, we understand that we're asking for you to submit an application that's a snapshot in time, and you may not know everything yet. So it's okay to say that these elements are evolving and that there may be a pretty dynamic outcome. Or, another example I think of where people come into some trouble is like if there's no natural endpoints, like, and the trial could go on for 17 years. Well, for us, we want to understand at what point do you think you'll have a natural ending for the story, even if there's no, release of a trial and a verdict or something. So we, help us understand through how much of the story you're going to tell. Another section that I think is useful, and sometimes people don't always fully know how to answer, is the topic summary. And we like to think of the topic summary as like the water the story is swimming in. We want to see the story, but the context around it that maybe we don't have as, folks sitting in North America with, the kind of media that we have in the United States. Maybe we don't have access fully to the context that your audience does. So help us understand what the audience is going to show up to the theater or the festival, knowing that maybe I don't. So that can just be useful to kind of set the table, to let us know the world in which the story sits. But maybe not all the stuff from the topic summary is going to be on screen. We can we can deal with those nuances and those distinctions for sure. But the story summary should really be the story that's going to happen on screen and give us a sense of the flow and what you're going to be looking at, even if, there's not resources to follow it forever.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I just want to hop in and ask people to fill out the second and final poll for this webinar. So if you can take a second to do that, that would be very much appreciated. And let me look for maybe, here it is. Yes. So please answer that. And is there someone is asking, Sheriff is asking, is there a funding window or time to look out for funding for a project?
Yeah, I would refer people to the IDA for just a comprehensive list of documentary funding opportunities that are happening. For the Institute, we have just completed a call for applications. So we'll be making our granting decisions roughly in the springtime, based on the applications we've just received. The Sandbox Fund will be accepting applications again in the spring. So we have 2 calls for applications, and that's the science-based fund. So we have 2 calls for application years. The documentary fund is 1 call for applications each year over the summer. But then there, other other organizations I've mentioned throughout the presentation will have various calls for applications within that, and the Institute will have other calls for applications as well.
Okay.
But we have an application portal on our website, so you're going to see what's open and what's coming soon.
Perfect. So make sure everyone do your due diligence and your research. If you know you have a project that you want to get funding, make sure, create a schedule for yourself, create an outline, say, hey, I'm starting in January. When do I need this money? what kind of documentary funds are out there, and just start making a list. It'll help you be organized, and it'll also help you time out your project as well so that you can keep it moving and keeping it with momentum so that when you do to apply to each one, you won't have to start from scratch each time. You'll know exactly what you're doing and you'll know what your timeframes are.
Yeah,
So let's okay. So I'm just gonna maybe answer one more question. Um, oh, Liz asked, what's the cap for the grant? So you said 50,000, right? Up to 50,000?
yes, we offer up to 50,000 for development and up to 100,000 for production and post.
Okay,
And so that's up to. So it, really depends on the needs of the project, the stage of production, um, that helps us make that distinction, but it's a pretty wide range.
perfect. So everyone, I hope that was incredibly helpful to you. I hope that this, like your projects get funded or you are motivated to have your projects funded and apply to Sundance, apply to all of the grants actually, because it'll spread out your odds. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Africa No Filter, for inviting Dominic and I to this conversation. If you haven't already, complete the second and final poll because this is a review of your experience and it's aimed at helping us deliver masterclasses that meet your needs. You can also reference this class again in the future as it'll be posted on Africa No Filter's YouTube page. And I hope everyone has a good night, afternoon, or morning, depending on where you are. And we are going to see each other soon. All right, so bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.